Hey guys, we are back with part 2 of week 5 in the Road to 8th edition. First up we have a faction focus on the Death Guard, which is one of the main armies in the new Dark Imperium box set. Rather excitingly, we have our first Forge World data slate. Then we've had some insight into how missions are going to work. Then we've had a faction focus on the Orcs. And finally, we've got a couple of bits of information about the Inceptors and the Primaris Space Marine Captain model. So first up then is the faction focus on the Death Guard. So as I said, these are the first army, or one of the armies that's in the Dark Imperium box set. So it's only right and proper that this faction focus then immediately after the release, or the information release of those contents, is the Death Guard, to give us a good idea of how these guys are going to play. So they carry over the disgustingly resilient rule, which we've seen for the Nurglings when we were looking at the faction focus on the Demons, which means they're ignoring wounds on a 5 or a 6. So even if weapons prevent an armour save and they take a wound, they're still going to have a 1 in 3 chance of ignoring it, which is pretty powerful. Plague Marines are troops in Death Guard armies, which is pretty standard. They're all toughness 5, again pretty standard. And we've had a couple of weapon bits, so Plague Knives give a reroll in combat on 1s. And instead of carrying regular bolters, they're carrying blight launchers, which are assault 2, strength 6, AP -2, causing D3 damage, which is rather potent. One of the good units though, what I feel is a good unit, is the Poxwalkers, which are pretty much zombies. And it looks like these units are going to be exceptionally cheap, but soak up lots of fire and incoming stuff at your more expensive units. So they're pretty cheap, they're going to be immune to morale, which means you're going to have to kill them to the last man, which is always a tough ask, in my opinion. But if you're carrying Typhus in your army, he's giving +1 strength and +1 toughness to nearby units. So combining that with Poxwalkers, they're going to be hard to shift off of objectives. Finally, we have a clue on the miasma of Pestilence power, and that's going to make enemies at a -1 to hit against that unit. So yeah, going to be exceptionally tough, and then with all those flies and diseases in your eyeballs, it's going to make you hard to hit that unit in the first place. So Death Guard doing what they should be doing. Sticking with Chaos, but moving on from the Death Guard, we have our first Forge World data slate, and that's of the Hellforged Leviathan Dreadnought. Here's a quick picture, just to remind you what he looks like. So he's basically a siege Dreadnought covered in rust and corruption, as is befitting any model of Chaos. And we've got this data slate just about to come up. And there's a few points that I'd like to really cover on this. I'm not going to read out all the rules. You can pause the screen and have a read at your leisure on this. But there's a couple of key points that I really want to point out. So we can see that his close combat weapons are doubling strength now. Previously that always used to cap at 10. So we see he's got a strength of 8, but now we have no cap. He has a strength of 16, which against vehicles, which we're seeing a common theme of around about a toughness 8, means he's going to be mincing vehicles on a 2+. And not just the 2+ will do, he's also doing that with some really heavy AP modifiers with at least a -3 or a -4, depending whether you're taking the claw or the drill. And that makes him going to be either a Titan killer or a character killer. Any kind of tough vehicle, he's going to be rinsing through it, which, to be honest, that's what he's pretty much designed to do. The other point I want to raise here is in his ranged weapon selection. Now we have our first ever look at a -5 AP modifier, and that's the Gravflux Bombard. Now previously to this we'd only seen Melter, and I think Dark Lance is doing a -4 AP modifier. Now we've got a -5, which, given the best save in the game is a 2+, this is the first weapon that's going to completely negate any kind of regular armour save. It doesn't negate invulnerable saves, they can still be taken, but this is the first time we've seen something completely remove any armour save that we've seen on any model to date. The other quick point to note is what happens when you kill him is that he has the last laugh. He can inflict mortal wounds on anything that happens to be standing near him when he gets completely wrecked. So even when you reduce this beast down, don't be anywhere near him when he explodes all over you. Moving into our first view then of a mission. So this particular mission that we've been given an insight to is called Only War. And you can see on the screen now if you just want to pause it and have a little read for yourself. But there's some interesting points to note about it in my opinion. First point to note is that there are 4 objectives on the board, and then depending on whether you roll on that table, it determines whether all 4 objectives are actually in play. Because you'll note that on the D3 roll of a 2 there, that 3 are randomly removed, leaving you 1 random selected, and that's your ancient relic, and that's worth all the points. The other victory conditions then for a 1 on that D3 roll is that it's basically a take and hold scenario, so you'll have your home base objectives and the enemy base objectives, and they're worth 2 points each at the end of the game. The third objective there is basically a rolling total, so at the end of each turn, each objective is worth 1 point each, so that total gets tallied up during the game, and that can swing backwards and forwards depending how aggressive you are, whether you can get into the enemy base and pick up their objectives while still holding your own. And we've seen those kind of conditions before in 7th and 6th edition, and in fact in the early Apocalypse games as well. So it's good to see that coming into 8th edition. And there is a 4th way to win the game if it goes all the way to the distance, but you can wipe out the enemy and that will automatically declare that side the winner. Now to me it looks like you can play this in any of the 3 ways to play, but there's a twist here on how, if you're going with power level methods of playing and there's a deficit on one side or the other, so the side with the lower power level is actually declared the underdog, and the underdog is going to get some bonuses and re-rolls to do with their command point. And not only that, the underdog gets to choose whether he wants to go first or second as well, so may not always be in your best interest to try and outclass your opponent with too many models and buff your power level beyond the level of the opponent. Now as you can tell, this mission is pretty easy to set up and pretty easy to get going, and that's why it's included in the free rules as well as the main rulebook. But there are plenty of other missions to look at, so we've got some open play missions, which is the standard game where you can just bring a battle, and that includes missions called Annihilation, Hold at All Costs, and Death or Glory. Then moving on from that, moving into narrative play, you get even more options and more rules and a few extra bits and pieces like stratagems. So there are 6 narrative play missions: Meat Grinder, Ambush, Patrol, Blitz, Sabotage and Rescue. And each of those missions is going to come with a set of specific stratagems depending whether you're the attacker or the defender. And that makes the games a little bit more unique, a little bit more special from a traditional kill each other at all cost type of games. Now we have an example of this coming up from the Sabotage game, and we can have a look at the different stratagems available for that. So we've got 3 for the attacker, 3 for the defender. Bit difficult to sort of interpret these without the context of having the mission though, so some of the words used in here and some of the scenarios used without that in-depth bit of added information for the mission itself, a bit difficult to put into context, so we'll skip on, but just to know that there are specific stratagems for specific narrative play games. Now for the competitive or match play games, there's going to be a lot of missions in here as well that we're overly familiar with from the previous version. So we're going to have Eternal War and Maelstrom of War, each with 6 different types of mission within them. But there's going to be a few tweaks apparently since the last outing of these. One of the big ones is that we've now got 6 deployment maps, so we can see one of those. I think we've seen this type of deployment map before from older editions, but there's going to be 6 maps rather than 3. There's going to be a change also to the way the objectives are going to work. So there's an objective deck of cards. If you see my last video, you can see you can actually pick the cards up, but they'll be printed in the rulebook as well if you don't want to spend that extra bit of cash. And that's going to keep the sort of the game constantly changing with those objectives coming out on that card deck. So finally on missions then, one of the big ones is a stratagem that any army can use, and that's called New Orders, and it's worth 2 command points, where you can basically burn a card. So if you've been given a tactical objective card, what's a good example? Destroying a monstrous creature, but your opponent doesn't have a monstrous creature, back in 7th edition for example, and you ended up sitting on a card that you couldn't really get rid of, and it was a bit of a waste. Now we had house rules in my Games Workshop that if you couldn't physically achieve that card, you got to burn it anyway. But now this is integrated into the competitive style of the game, where those kind of house rules would never wash with your opponent really. If you're going to get given a bad hand, then you can now burn a couple of points and get rid of a tactical objective card that is probably not either applicable or achievable in that game. Next up then, we have the faction focus on the Orcs. Now this has been long awaited, I think, because there's been a concern about horde armies and morale, especially with big mobs of Orcs. Normally I've only ever seen Orc armies either all in killer cans or all made of bikers with pain boys in the middle and all the rest of it. Lots of double wound knobs on bikes. But now we've got some information on how the new Orcs are going to play. So information up, we have Mega Knobs with a 2-up save and 3 wounds. With the AP system changing, boys are more likely to get their 6-up t-shirt save than ever before, because of the AP 0 weapons on bolters, for example. And with no more challenges, that unit knob isn't going to get singled out and smashed before his Power Claw gets to do any damage, normally against either one model as well during that challenge. He now gets to wade his way through a thicker enemy unit. We've got a couple of bits of information then on a big chopper, which is looking like a good option for Orc knobs now, with a +2 strength and those 2 damage with a -1 AP. And the chopper seems to have got a bit of a buff in the same way that a chainsword did for the Space Marines, giving it an extra attack for the model carrying it. Now the big news for Orc players who are concerned about getting smushed with morale is that war bosses within 3 inches of a unit can just kill off D3 models and prevent morale failure, stop them running away, so it might be far less on your casualty count. But the big one is this mob rule. Each unit using its size of the unit as its leadership, or it can use the leadership of a nearby unit as well. So this should prevent big damage in your receiving fire from the enemy, so in their shooting phase when you're taking loads of casualties and rolling against typically a low leadership of an Orc and then inflicting more damage to your unit, this should see that sufficient numbers survive to get into the combat where they're going to excel. They've got quite a few other rules to skim through for the Orcs. So we know that a Pain Boy is going to give a 6+ extra save versus wounds already taken. The custom force field is going to give a 5-up invulnerable save against shooting attacks. Now all these rules are also going to stack, so there's going to be plenty of manipulation with a lot of these Orc special abilities, and that's the design aim, I believe, from the Orc designer. The War rule allows you to charge after you've advanced. That's going to be pretty good. That's in theme, in my opinion. And the Here We Go rule is going to allow a reroll on failed charge distances. So combining all of those rules, as I said, they're all going to stack, should see enough Orcs survive into combat and make it through combat even after advancing and charging. So that's going to be pretty good to see, very thematic, exactly what I want from an Orc army. Finally for this video then, we've had some extra information about the Primaris Space Marines. Yes, once again we've got more information on our super uber soldiers, and we've got a stat line for both the Primaris Captain in Gravis armour and then also the Inceptor squad, which seemed to be a bit of a mystery to many people. So I'll stick up the stat line for the Captain first. Quite a lot of changes for a Captain model in my opinion. We kind of expected him to have a weapon skill and a ballistic skill of 2+. The Gravis armour is giving an extra point of toughness, so we can see that the toughness stat on your Captain is now a 5. It's not given any kind of Terminator-esque rules, no 2+ save for example, it's still a 3-up. But yeah, its extra toughness seems to be where it's at. Now being a character, we're seeing this a lot now. He's got an extra point of movement to make him a little bit faster, and we can now see what those gauntlets with the bolters on are called. So we've got a Bolt Storm Gauntlet. You can see this has 2 profiles, one for shooting and one for combat. So it's a pistol weapon, pistol 3, so that's going to also be able to work in combat as well. But as a melee weapon, it's basically a power fist, but it's causing AP -3 and D3 wounds. And as before with a regular power fist that we've seen, you're -1 to hit roll. But because he's got a weapon skill of 2+, he's only going to be hitting on a 3+, which is still pretty damn good given that he's already got 5 attacks as well. He's also carrying a mastercrafted power sword, and from what I can tell then, the mastercrafted bit is giving it a damage of 2 rather than a damage of 1. Still carrying user strength and an AP of -3, but it's causing 2 damage this time. Moving into his abilities then, we've got And Thou Shall Know No Fear, which is a standard Space Marine rule. Don't know what that does yet, it's obviously got a page reference there to something we haven't seen. He has a 4-up invulnerable save, and he carries the Rites of Battle, giving a reroll of 1 for friendly units of the same chapter within 6 inches of that model. And notice that it just says to hit, so that can be for melee and for shooting, so that's quite a powerful rule if you're going to keep your Captain on the front lines with your combat units in the close combat phase. He also carries a number of keywords that I'm not sure what they're going to mean yet. He carries the Mark 10 Gravis keyword as well as Primaris and Captain as a keyword. So we don't know actually what those keywords are going to do yet, but he has those specific keywords. One other final point before we move on then, he has 6 wounds. So a Captain in Gravis armour is now pretty hench with 6 wounds, so Single last cannons are going to struggle to remove him from play in a single turn. Yeah, so I think this is probably the right way to go for your heroic captain models that typically would be hiding and then just sort of buffing a unit in combat before. I think now this is going to make him pretty aggressive. You're going to want him in combat with all those attacks and all those melee special abilities, and that Rites of Battle is going to make a big difference, I think, in combat. We also now have the Inceptor data slate as well, so these little jump marines that I'm still not convinced I like the look of, to be honest, but we now know what those weapons magically are. Let's go straight into those weapons, and they are assault bolters. So they are handheld heavy bolters. You can see they're assault 3, strength 5, -1 AP, and they're carrying 2 of them, so that means these guys are assault 6 with those weapons. Yeah, not close combat orientated, but certainly very, very shooty. So a good flanking unit trying to get round to the sides and put that, you know, they're a unit size maximum of 3. You can't add any more models to this, but they're going to be kicking out, you know, 18 shots a turn between the 3 of them, which is pretty powerful. Now, these guys are also wearing the Gravis armour as well, so you can see in their stat line they're carrying that toughness of 5. So that's clearly where the Gravis armour is making a difference to these models. And then moving into the abilities, then they have a crushing charge. So this is, you know, they're going to cause, as it says there, enemy units that are moved within an inch during that charge phase. On a 6, they're going to start taking mortal wounds. So it's not overly powerful because you've only got 3 models, and you need that 6 to get that mortal wound in. And then we can also see, I guess it's kind of a replacement to a deep strike kind of rule, meteoric descent. So they can be placed anywhere 9 inches away from an enemy model on the board, and carrying on the theme that we've seen with other models that are placing in this kind of way, like the I think it was the Trigon we've seen a couple of videos ago. There's no scattering anymore, so your scattered ice are going away, but it's that 9-inch distance seems to be key for everything. So making sure that if you're really aggressive, you can probably push for a charge, but failed charges could be seen as a penalty. So you just got to kind of watch your distances and be very, very careful. These guys carry a couple of extra keywords as well, so they carry this fly rule, don't know what that's going to be yet, and an Inceptor squad special rule, or a special keyword. Again, no idea what that's going to be doing yet, but not long to find out. Finally, this weekend is Warhammer Fest, starting Saturday and rolling through Sunday at Coventry. I have a ticket, I am going to be there on Sunday. If you want to drop a comment in and let me know if you're going to be there, and maybe you want to meet up or say hello or something. I am going to be vlogging my very first vlog, so you're going to see my ugly mug appearing on a video in the very near future, along with 2 of my friends who are coming with us. We're going to be heading up early doors on Sunday morning to get to the arena. So if you want to come along, say hello. I'll be checking in on YouTube and Twitter during the day, posting some pictures up and stuff. You'll see me walking around with a big camera, but then I guess 90% of the other people there will have cameras as well. But yeah, feel free to drop a comment, let me know if you're going to be there, and you want to come and say hello. And more importantly, feature on the vlog and appear on this channel in the flesh. How exciting would that be, I am sure. Anyway, that's going to wrap this video up. I hope you enjoyed Week 5's update. If you're going to Warhammer Fest, I shall see you there. If not, I'll be editing the vlog for next week, and yeah, I'll catch you on the next video.